welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, then my name's Katie. I'm a mixed media artist, and today's video I'm going to be sharing the process for a piece that was created for my daily art challenge. So this is quite old footage. This was done back in March when I was doing my 100-day challenge, and I'm going to be using masking fluid and acrylic ink and water-based ink as well. So I hadn't used masking fluid for a really long time. And when I was doing my 100-day challenge, I found that there were some themes that I was exploring, and one of those was greenhouses. So I decided to buy some masking fluid because I thought that would be the perfect subject to test it out on. I'm using this masking fluid from Frisk. You can see it can get a little bit messy, but the other masking fluid I've used before years and years ago was Winsor & Newton. Frisk is a brand that I hadn't really heard of, but I've tried since then. I've got some paper from them and also this masking fluid, and I thought it was great quality. I was really impressed with it. But one of the things that you need to make sure when you are using masking fluid is to use a cheap or low quality brush. I think you can coat it first with something so that it doesn't ruin the bristles, but for me I just used a cheaper brush, and you have to make sure that you wash it afterwards, otherwise you will have that masking fluid on the bristles and you won't be able to use it for paint. So you can see here that I haven't done any sketches first, and I just used the masking fluid to mark out the shape. I knew that I wanted the frame of the greenhouse to be pure white, and then I can add on lots of colour in the greenhouse and around it. So here I am starting to mix up some of my colours. I'm using the Rowney System 3 acrylic ink, which I really love, and I also mixed that a little bit with some white gouache just to make it paler, and because I didn't have a white acrylic ink at this time. So I start by putting on the colour, and I'm just doing this in an A3 sketchbook. It's from Langton, and it's just one that I had in the cupboard, and I did tear it out after this, but it's actually not A3, it's a lot taller. It just meant that I could really go wild with the colour, and you can see I'm using a much bigger brush than I usually do, mostly because I just wanted to play with the textures and really create a lot of mark making with these brighter colours. Now, I didn't actually love the way this turned out, but as I said, this was for the daily art challenge, and it was helpful for me just to sort of get this idea out of my head. Not all of the art that you create has to be perfect or beautiful masterpieces, and this certainly wasn't, but it did help push me along in terms of this little greenhouse project I was doing, and it was a fun experiment. Like I said, I hadn't used masking fluid in a long time, and I didn't have any problems with this one. It came off really nicely, so you'll see me peeling it off towards the end, but it didn't pull on the paper, but that might be because of the paper. It's quite thick because I wanted it to take a lot of wet media. So I'm using the acrylic ink here and just creating lots of colour. There wasn't a plan for this at all. I just wanted it to be really bright and colourful, and I wanted the palm house and the greenhouse to be really full of lots of colour. I add some of the acrylic ink straight to the page, and then I mix it with some of the medium that's already there. I like to add on red because it adds a lot of warmth, and when I do add red with my greens, it creates a nice olivey brown colour, and I just really like the way that that looked. And I found that the paper was keeping it quite wet, so I could add more colour on top and it would blend really nicely without any issues. It also didn't go underneath any of the masking fluid, so you can see where the masking fluid is, but it's not seeping underneath that, so there's a really good seal there. One of the things I really enjoyed doing with this was adding on like some of these trees and like the leaves. So obviously this is like a palm tree in there, and I thought that was really fun. So I do add that elsewhere on the picture as well. Like I said, there's no plan, so I tend to just go with the flow when I create. There's not any ideas on what it will be. I just have a really rough like layout in my head, and I'm just putting that down onto the paper. If I find something that I'm really enjoying and that I really like doing on the piece, then I'll do that further. I'll add that on over to the other side, and I'll be like, okay, I really like that, let's do that some more. So really my process is quite intuitive, and I tend to just go with what I'm enjoying at the time. So I've finished up the main base of colour, and now I'm just adding on some more layers just to add in more texture, and I've moved on to my size 10 round brush, which if you've seen any of my other work, this is always my go-to. I really didn't like the rest of the image. I'm quite pleased with how the colour and the details are in the greenhouse, but I thought the rest of it was a bit lacking, and I didn't really fix that. I still don't really love it, but it definitely helped putting on some more of that green just to deepen up those bushes in the foreground. So now I'm coming on to the fun part where I'm using lots of mixed media just to add on more colour in the greenhouse. I used that pink Stabilo woody chunky pencil and also some Sennelier oil pastels because these are really vibrant and they layer really nicely. So I'm just putting on little dots around the place, adding on more lines and more interest, and kind of spacing that around what I've already put in there with the different leafy elements. It worked the best on the darker areas, so that's where I try to put most of this colour. And I also wanted to contrast it because obviously there were a lot of greens, so that's why I added in the pink and also this really nice blue colour. When I was doing some of my greenhouse experiments, I did do like a blue frame, and I really like that, so that definitely influenced this piece, and I find that a lot of my artwork is linked in little ways like that, and I won't necessarily know it unless I create more and more. So even though this piece didn't turn out how I wanted to, I definitely learned from it. So now I'm coming in with my Neocolours, which as you know is a staple in a lot of my mixed media artwork. Again, trying to fix the outside of the greenhouse, and it definitely helped a little bit. I always love adding these lines onto like my grass and things and adding in little scribbles just to be a bit more playful with it. And although it was quite simple mark making, I think it did help a little bit just to increase the textures and things in the grass just to match a bit of the greenhouse. I also really enjoy adding in this warmer yellow tone and then more and more scribbles as I layer up my pencils alongside the Neocolours. Now I'm coming onto the sky and just deepening up some of the blues there, but I also wanted to add more interest up here as well without distracting from the actual greenhouse. So again, I'm coming in with the woody pencil and I'm just adding on some lines. I do this usually with water, and this was the first time I've done it in the sky. It's definitely something that I enjoyed doing and I really like the effect, so I'm going to remember that and try and use that in more of my pieces. Okay, so now we're on to the peeling of the masking fluid. Now at first this was quite frustrating. I was using a little rubber, this is the Tombow Mono rubber, and it was really handy for getting it started, so you could see I rubbed it off a little bit and then I could pull it with my fingers. It was just helpful to get that little grip. But especially this first bit, it was a bit frustrating because the masking fluid kept snapping. It's not like one of those really smooth things where you get it all in one go, but it was still really fun to do, and like by the end of it I feel like I was getting the knack of it a little bit better, and it was just very satisfying to see the contrast between that stark white frame and the colour that we placed on top of it. So this was the satisfying part. I think this was the bit that I was looking forward to the most, just to see how it looked with the frame. And it really came together at this point because obviously that was the main part that made it into a palm house. And I really was impressed with how the masking fluid held up. But I did find that there were some edges that weren't as smooth as I'd like, which was probably from me applying it with a paintbrush. So I think you can definitely get pens with the masking fluids which would give you a smoother line, but I also quite like the rough edges. Like, it's not super perfect, and I think there's a charm to that as well. You can see my little pile of the masking fluid bits over there on the right, and it did leave a lot of different bits on the page, so I just tried to clean those off with a very clean brush. And then where there are bits that I missed with the masking fluid and had gone over with the ink, I'm just touching it up with some white gouache paint, and the only place where it did tear was where I put on loads and I'd really made it too thick on the doors, and that was the bit that did slightly tear up the paper, but not much, and I could easily draw on top, which is what I'm doing here with a Derwent drawing pencil, and I found that was a little bit too light, so I do come in with a slightly darker grey here just to make those details a bit clearer, but it didn't completely ruin the paper and I could draw on top, especially over the gouache which I added as an extra layer. So I'm just coming in to clean up some more of the edges, making some of the lines a little bit straighter, but overall I think it turned out okay despite not being exactly how I wanted. It was a really helpful experiment in using masking fluid, and I will leave all of the links to the materials down below. I'll see you next Sunday with a new YouTube video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a creative week. See you later!